Hi folks, this is Meredith from the Papery Craftery, and today I'm going to be making another flower on my husking board. Today we're going to be making some quilling paper poppies. So to do that, I have this nice bright crimson from Quilled Creations. I also have a color called moss green from Quilled Creations, kind of a pale yellowish green. Any pale yellow will also work for this if you have that handy. And then there's a little bit of fringe involved, and for that I'm going to be using this wider 3/8 inch black paper. If you do have just thinner paper, I'll show you later how to use what you have. And I will mention also that the red and the moss green were 1/8 inch paper. I do have my needle tool here to get my flower off the board, but also to make the middle of your flower. I have some small scissors, some quilling tweezers, and a little paintbrush to wipe up any excess glue. I also have for glue my Elmer's glue wall in my needle nose container, along with some Aleene's tacky glue for when we make the actual flowers. You're also going to need something to crimp your paper. Poppy flowers have sort of a fluttery edge to them, so we're going to be using this kind of medium crimp section here. If you just have any other type of crimper, that will work just fine as well. When we start building our flowers, we're going to be building them on this workboard covered in parchment. We're also going to be molding our flowers a little bit. So use whatever you have handy for that. If you use a quilling mold, that's great. I'm actually going to be using the top of my pin container here, so I have that available. And then here's the star of our show. This is your husking board. Last week I showed two different types of petals to make on your husking board. This is going to be a third type. This is more of a fan shape. So I have that center pin with the slot in it there. And then I have all of my other pins radiating out from that in this shape. Now I'm not going to be going through as much detail on how to set up the husking board as I did in the last video, but I'll definitely link to that in the description box. If you're unfamiliar, that's a great place to start. But for now, this is the final way that my pins are going to be set up. I'm not going to be having them all as I am making the flower because there's just so many and they're so tight. We're going to be putting them in one at a time. But in case you're wondering what your final setup should look like, you might want to make some notes or pause your video now and just take a little screenshot so you're aware of what you're going for. Now the first thing we're going to do is take our red paper that we're using for the poppy petals. Whatever red you like is up to you. These strips are 18 inches long, and I'm going to need about 3 of them to make one of the petals. So to do that, I am going to glue them all end to end, tore off all the ends to make a torn surface. That always works best for quilling, remember, because it gives you a little bit of little fibers that make a nice smooth connection to the next piece. Tiny dot of glue on the end, and just give a little press, and there you have it. We're just going to add the third one on as well. Sometimes they don't like to line up exactly the way you want them to. It doesn't have to be perfect straight, but get them the best you can. Another dot of glue, and there is our third strip. So all in all, that is about 54 inches of quilling paper. If you wanted to just add your strips as you go on your husking board, every time you ran out, you added more. That's up to you. It does get a little long to have this really long strip, but I find it easier to glue it all at once. So now you can see that I took all the pins off my board except the center slotted pin, the 2 on the ends where I know where to stop, and my 1 in the center. I just found it easier to remove all the other pins because they were so close and I didn't want to keep knocking them out. So this is just kind of a guide of where I want the center to be and then where it's going to stop on either side. So again, short version of how to use a husking board. First, we're going to line our paper up in the slot, which is the bottom pin, and then a little bit of a tail on the side, and on that tail I'm going to add a tiny bit of glue, and we're going to be wrapping our strip around our center post and back down to our starting point. Remember, on a husking board, especially this style of petal, we're always going to be starting and ending at that slotted pin. That's our starting and ending point for every turn. So I'm just holding this together here just to get that glue to set for a moment. And now we're going to start wrapping around other pins and adding each one as we go. So notice my strip is pulled to the left there. So that's the side I'm going to start with, adding pins. Pull my strip up, add a pin to the side of the first one, and then pull my strip back. If that ending post is getting in your way, by all means remove it. I just need a visual where to stop, or I'll just keep going and adding too many turns here. A little bit of glue back at the starting point, and then I'm pulling it to the right side. Same thing, add a pin, and pull it back down again. A little bit of glue at the starting point, and then we're back to the left, add a pin, and back down to the starting point. And that's pretty much how you're going to go back and forth with this until you get to your ending point, which is those two pins that I have left. If you want your flower to be a different size, your fan will be a different size, by all means add more or fewer of these posts. This is just an idea of a different way to make a different style of a flower petal. I am getting to my end point here, and it's getting a little tricky to maneuver my strip around those end posts. So I ended up just moving them up a spot, kept going, but reminding myself I still have to add one pin to either side. Totally up to you, however you want to do that. It does get a little tight at the end there. So this is the one I needed to remind myself to put on that side. Back to the front, still gluing every time. Whether you glue every pass of that slotted pin is up to you. Sometimes it depends on the type of flower you're making, but there's so much involved in these poppy flowers that just to make it a little more secure, I chose to glue every round. Now I'm snipping off the excess when it gets past my starting pin. You're going to hold on to that. We're going to be using that in our crimper in just a second. I want to glue down that last little bit. It's a little tricky to tear on the husking board, so I know I always say tear your quilling paper, but sometimes it's just not possible without ruining your work. So for now, cutting will be fine to get that tail free. And hold that just for a second and we should be good. Okay, that's what it should look like at this point if you used the same setup I did. Okay, put that aside for now. We're going to take that tail and we are going to run it through our crimper. But first, I do want to add some more torn edges just to make it easier for it to adhere to my flower. So like I said earlier, I'm going to be using this medium tooth here on the bottom just for a little kind of fluttery edge. Something like that. And now it's just a matter of gluing this all around the outside of my petal. So zoom in a little bit for that. The nice thing about this crimped paper is it sort of just cups around the bottom there, and that's a good place to start. And then what I found to work the best, instead of putting glue all the way around the outside of my petal, I put a little dot of glue on every kind of valley here, or peak, I guess it depends on your perspective, but every point where the crimped paper is going to meet the petal. That just seems to work the best. I wasn't getting a good adhesion the other way, so I found that way works a little bit better. So I do one side, add some more glue to where I think it's going to meet that whole back there. You want to be careful not to pull too hard on your crimped paper because you can lose your shape if you really manhandle it. So I'm trying to very gently get that to stick. And And turning the last corner there, adding a bit of glue till I get to what I think is about the end. Yeah, okay. And again, I'm just going to snip off whatever's left. There we go. And we don't need that piece, so we can get rid of that or keep it, whatever you do with your little bits, but we don't need it for this project. And get that to stick there. It's a little hard to see the crimped paper while it's still on your husking board, but we will handle taking it off the board in just a second. And now we can start pulling your pins out. You want to leave the slotted pin in because you do have that paper running through it. You're not going to be able to just pull that straight out the top. Get everybody else off there. And then I like to slide my needle tool underneath. You could use tweezers to pull it up, or you could use like a toothpick or something, but then it's easier to get the slotted pin out. So there's sort of our fan shape. Very nice. You are going to need to use 4 of those for each poppy. This is a very simplified version of a poppy. There's a lot more extravagant quilling paper poppies out there in the world. I just wanted another excuse to use the husking board. I made this project years and years ago on my blog, and similar style, but I kind of fancied it up a little bit for this project and cleaned it up a bit, but it's still very simple. This is great for those who don't use your husking board too often. But now we're going to start putting our flower together. I'm using tacky glue because it's great for molding flowers. I don't want these to be very flat. Poppies have a lot of movement to them. They're very light petals, so they sort of fly in the wind quite a bit. In the big poppy fields, you can see they just kind of flutter around. So to mold them, I like to use tacky glue because you can set it for a little bit and then put it in a mold, and the process just works a lot faster than just your regular white glue. So using some tacky glue, I just glued them in 2 different sets, kind of like little bow ties. And we're going to let that sit for just a little bit while we make the center of our flowers. For that, I'm using this moss green, and this is another 18-inch strip. I am going to tear off one end because the other end is going to go right on my needle tool. If you want to use a slotted tool for this, by all means, whatever you're comfortable with. This is just what I have handy, my favorite tool. If you watched for a while, you've seen me use this tool hundreds of times. Now I'm going to just roll all the way to the end. I want a nice tight coil here. Once it gets a little bit big, I like to take it off my tool and do it by hand so it doesn't go crooked on me. But it just takes a couple seconds to get it wound all the way to the end. Like I said, if you have a pale yellow, that will work beautifully for this project. Even more of like a golden yellow would be great. This is a paper that I have on hand, and I like to use it for flower centers lately. When I get to the end, I'm going to add a little bit of glue and press my tail to make it seal. And then we're just going to dome this very slightly by pushing up from the bottom, a little bit of glue underneath, and then either using your finger or a paintbrush, wipe out any excess, and that will keep your dome shape for you. That's all we're looking at for this part. And we're going to move on now to do the fringed paper around the yellow center. And like I said earlier, I'm using this wider paper mostly because I have a lot of it and I don't use it very often, and I don't show it on my channel very often. So it's nice to pull out new things. If you don't have or want to buy new paper, you can kind of stack 2 thin strips. Instead of end to end, you're on the long end of each other. Tiny bit of glue along one edge and then line the other one up. Let that dry fully, and then you can snip it this way. It's like a DIY wider strip. I know I've done this in other videos. I can't recall exactly which ones off the top of my head, but I've done that a number of times as well. But same process for the wider strip. We've fringed before. just little snips very close to each other. I do have a video on different fringing techniques and why I like them and why I don't, and why I always come back to just using scissors. So I'll link that in the description box for this video as well. If you are wondering why the heck is she doing this by hand, that seems kind of crazy. It's just, I find it easier and it gives a much more delicate kind of a fringe. But regardless, I'll pin that video to the description box too, so you can see for yourself. And you only need about 4 inches or so of fringe work for these flowers, so it does go pretty quickly. All we need to do now is put a little dab of glue on the bottom of our fringe strip. Remember, to keep the fringe together, you don't want to cut all the way through. You just snip about 3/4 of the way. Get that lined up on the edge of our yellow center. And then it's just a matter of wrapping the rest around. I like to just keep putting a little bit of glue at a time. Woohoo. Sometimes I drop it. It's so small. So a little bit of glue, get that lined up, and then a little bit more, and then just keep going that way. It's a little bit easier than doing all of it at once, especially if you're like me and you drop things. Get that keep wrapped around, keep going. There we go. And at this point, if you'd like to fan out your fringe, you can do that. You can wait till you put your whole flower together. Either way is fine, but you want to make sure that your fringe is secured around your center. Give that a few squeezes to make sure that the glue is setting. There you go. We can open that up. If that fringe is a little long for you, you can give it a little bit of a haircut. Whatever you want to do is good. And that is the last piece of our puzzle, except for the molding of our petals. So we're going to go back to the petals. At this point, the glue has started drying, but it's not totally set yet. And I'm just using the top of my pin case here to get them set up the way I want them. I like one set, this one here, to be a little bit flatter. And then I am going to use my quilling mold to give the other set a little bit more dimension. So that one has some movement to it, but it's not super bent. This one's got a little bit more. And you can experiment and make them whatever way you want to. If you want to make them both flat, that's up to you. If you want to really experiment with how folded you can get these so they really look like they're blowing in the wind, absolutely, that would look awesome. Now we have our 3 parts of our flower, and we're going to start putting them together. So we have the flatter of the 2, that's going to be the base of our flower. A little bit of tacky glue there, and then turn your second set so they're sort of in the opposite direction. And I just want to get that set in a way I like. That's good. And then it's just a matter of putting your center on. If you want to keep using tacky glue, that's fine. I just grabbed the other one, just the Elmer's here. I'm just going to put, eventually, I did not store this upside down while I was working today, so it's going to be clogged for a second. There we go. A little bit of glue around the edge, and then that can go right on top, just like that. And that is our super simple quilling paper poppy. I love how striking these flowers are. Not only are they a good size for quilling paper projects, but just the colors together, they're just so vibrant. And like I mentioned before, when you're molding them, you can really play around with the dimension of them. This one's a little bit flatter, and the other brighter red one has a little bit more movement to them. So you put them together and they look like, you know, a bunch of flowers, because not all flowers are going to look exactly the same. As always, if you have any questions about how these flowers were made, how to use a husking board, don't forget to reach out in the comment section and I'll answer your questions as soon as I can. You also want to look in the description box for this video to find all the supplies and tools that I used, and also all those other videos I mentioned about using a husking board and using how to fringe quilling paper as well. You don't want to forget to like and subscribe so you can be around for my next video. And also don't forget to look on my Buy Me a Coffee page because I do have an extra video there that you will not find anywhere else. Thanks so much for watching as always, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.